Good evening and welcome to day 2 of the 2022 SABR Analytics Conference. Tonight, we will be bringing you research presentations from Rob Maines, Sarah Thompson, and Ryan Croton, as well as a panel discussion on the technical skills of being an analyst with Dan O'Coin, Maggie O'Hara, Nick Wan, and Kareem Kassim. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsors, Major League Baseball and Rawlings, along with tonight's session sponsor, Rapsodo, for helping make tonight's programming possible. Just a couple of housekeeping reminders for everyone. All of these sessions are being recorded and we will be sending them out to you after the conference has concluded. And please feel free to make use of the Q&A functionality in the Zoom window for our presenters, and you can ask them some questions along the way. So we'll go ahead and get started. Our first research presenter tonight is Rob Maines. Rob, take it away.
Hey, I shall do that. Thank you, Scott. Let me just quickly share my screen with you. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining me tonight to talk about the third time through the order penalty on March 18th, the new traditional start of spring training, full slate of games. The title of my presentation, I should probably mention I'm a writer for Baseball. Now, is it shared okay? I'm going to assume it's shared okay. Okay, the title of my presentation, the third time through the order penalty, is worse than you thought. This presentation sort of makes an assumption that you have an opinion going into this about what the third time through the order penalty is in order to feel whether it's worse than you thought or not. And in fact, I think that most of you do. This is a fairly familiar sabermetric concept. Tango, Lichtman, and Dolphin, in their seminal publication, The Book, back in 2007, wrote, as the game goes on, the hitter has a progressively greater advantage over the starting pitcher. Specifically, what they found was that the second time a starting pitcher faces the opposing lineup, he does a little bit worse, and he does considerably more, has considerably more of a challenge the third time through the order, hence the term the third time through the order penalty. Now, even if you're not aware of the sabermetric roots of this, I think that this became part of the popular nomenclature when it was a cause celeb in the 2020 World Series. You probably remember this scene. This is Blake Snell departing from the mound with his head down in Game 6 of the World Series that year. He had just allowed only his second hit of the night, a single to Austin Barnes, who was the 18th batter he faced. He'd thrown only 73 pitches, had struck out 9 batters. He was pitching a great game. Tampa was leading 1-0 with 1 out in the 6th. But rather than leave Snell into the game to face the opposing order a third time, even though the leadoff hitter Mookie Betts had struck out swinging twice against Snell, Cash elected to go to the bullpen to avoid that third time through the order. Of course, you know what happened by the time the inning was over. The Dodgers had a lead that they would not relinquish en route to clinching the series with their victory in Game 6. This blew up, as you might expect, pretty much immediately. I thought we might lose John Smoltz on air when Cash pulled Snell. Columnists excoriated Cash over the next several days and months. And even in last year's Sabermetrics Analytics Conference, our keynote speaker, Brian Kenny, talked about this move. Now, interestingly, we almost saw a repeat of this in the World Series last year. Ian Snell was taken out of Game 3 of the World Series after 5 innings with a no-hitter intact. Now, like Snell, he'd faced exactly 18 pitchers. Like Snell, he had a 1-0 lead. Like Snell, he had pitched a really good game. I would argue not quite as good as Snell, but unlike Snell, Brian Snitker's gambit worked, and the Braves went on to win the game and to win the series. But 2 times in a row, 2 years in a row, our game, when it's got the biggest spotlight of the year on it, the World Series, we saw a pitcher pitching a strong game taken out before he could face the opposing lineup the third time. So everyone became aware of what the third time through the order penalty is. And this is easily available today. You can look it up. This is from the fantastic Baseball Reference website. This is their Baseball Reference 2021 Pitching League splits page. And if you can't read those tiny numbers, what it shows is that the first time pitchers faced the opposing order in 2021, starting pitchers, they allowed a 708 OPS. That rose to 747 the second time and 779 the third. So if you do the math, the third time compared to the first two times on average was about 7% worse. Now, it's important to know what goes into those numbers I just showed you. First time through the order, what Baseball Reference does is they're taking every starting pitcher, how they did against the first 9 batters whom we faced. Second time, it's batters 10 through 18. Third time, it's batters 19 through 27. That gives us the results we've seen here. And this is good for illustrating, I think, what the third time through the order is. But I would argue there are a couple limitations to this presentation. The first one is that not all pitchers last long enough to face the order a third time. In that first time through the order bucket, you're going to include pitchers who faced only 9 or even not that many batters before they got pulled out of the game. Case in point, last year, June 4th, Twins Royals. Matt Shoemaker started for the Twins, faced 10 batters, 9 of them scored, he was out of the game. Now, first time through the order bucket's going to include all 9 of the batters he faced against Kansas City that night. Second time through the order bucket is going to include the last batter he faced, he gave up a home run to Whit Merrifield. And if our goal in looking at the third time through the order penalty is to determine whether a pitcher who went through the lineup 2 times, like Snell, like Anderson, how he's going to do the third time, the addition of Shoemaker or any other pitcher who didn't last long enough to face the batter the third time is not going to give us additional information. In fact, since usually guys who don't make it to batter 19 or beyond are lifted because of ineffectiveness, it may overstate the OPS allowed first and second times relative to what a pitcher would do the third time, and there might understate the third time through the order penalty, making the first 2 times through a little too high, making the third low. However, there's also a limitation with lineup position. As everybody knows, any well-designed lineup is going to have the best hitters positions. And so if a pitcher is pulled from the third time through the order after facing, let's say, the first 4 batters, he's got a much tougher job that third time through when he's facing only batters 1 through 4 than he did the first couple times when he got to face batters 5 through 9, kind of the softer part of the opposing team's lineup. So that might overstate the OPS he allows the third time relative to the first 2 times, and consequently overstate the third time through the order penalty. What I tried to do was to adjust for both of these. And what I did in this example is I looked in 2021 at only pitchers who lasted at least 19 batters in, who faced the order a third time, and see how they performed by lineup position. For example, last year, there were 4,858 games started by pitchers. 3,795 of those pitchers faced the leadoff hitter a third time. And as you can see, the first couple times they faced those leadoff hitters, they allowed about the same OPS. That rose to 781 the third time. In my last column there, ratio, it's the ratio of the third time through the order OPS divided by the average of the first 2. 2021, pitchers who made it 3 times through the order allowed an OPS to leadoff hitters 5% higher than the first times, in the third time than they did the first 2 times. What you can see is that's actually low. In most lineup positions, the third time through the order penalty is a lot higher than that 5%. You can see for number 3 hitters, they were 19% better the third time through the order than the first 2 times. The lone exception is number 8 hitters. We're going to see later that was an anomaly. And number 9 hitters in every season in baseball, other than 2020 and all seasons starting with this one, third time through the order penalty is going to be severe because of, at least in National League games, you've got a pitcher batting. If your starting pitcher is pitching well enough to face the opposing number 9 hitter a third time, it's probably got the lead. That number 9 hitter is probably going to be a pinch hitter. He's going to do a lot better than the pitcher for whom he is pinch hitting. So that's 2021. I want to look now at the last 5 years. And what I did here is for 2017 through 2021, again, for pitchers who face the opposing order 3 times, by lineup position, I set the OPS they allowed the first time through the order at 100. That's those gray bars, all the same there. Second time, another set of gray bars, you can see generally a little bit higher. And the third time, the red bars, consistently, we saw the third time through the order, OPS allowed considerably higher than the first couple times, with greater for the number 9 hitters, because, as I mentioned, the presence of pitchers. Now, the obvious question is, why is this occurring? Why is there this penalty? And there are 2 competing narratives here. One is batter familiarity. Obviously, over the course of 3 plate appearances, in which a batter gets to watch the pitcher and also gets to watch teammates against that pitcher, he can get a good idea of how the pitcher's working, what pitches he might see during his plate appearance. Now, if this theory is true, the third time through the order penalty should be pretty durable over baseball history. The advantage that Mike Trout has facing a pitcher he's seen 3 times is the same advantage Willie Mays had, same advantage Joe DiMaggio had, same advantage Ty Cobb had. This should be something we'd see as a consistent trend over baseball history. The competing explanation is pitcher fatigue. Obviously, a tiring pitcher is going to be less effective. Now, if this explanation holds, we might be seeing the third time through the order increasing over time, especially over the last few years. You know, we live in an era where the story is that starters are trained to throw 100 just about max effort pitches and leave the game in favor of their bullpen. That would suggest that as they get deeper into the game, as they start facing that lineup a third time, they're in a situation they're not well trained for, and thus they're going to be less effective. I'll tell you, in sabermetric circles, this is not settled. You've got 2 of the Saber Analytics Award nominees this year have taken opposite sides of this. Cameron Grove has argued in favor of batter familiarity. My friend Rob Arthur has argued in favor of batter fatigue. And I'm not going to try to officiate it, but what I think would be interesting here, to look back over time and see, when did the penalty become prominent? When did we start to see the third time through the order penalty really emerge as something that was hurting pitchers? What I did is I looked at the third time through the order penalty for the entire divisional era. That's 1969 through 2021, 53 years, including some years like 1974, when 28% of pitchers completed their games, and there were 34 pitchers who threw 250 or more innings, and includes last season, when we had only 33 non-7 inning complete games all season, and Dak Wheeler had the most innings pitched in the majors, just 213 and a third. So for each year, I took pitchers who faced the order a third time by lineup position and looked at what the penalty was. So here's how it looks, for instance, for leadoff hitters. And you recall that for leadoff hitters, the penalty was about 5% in 2021. If we go back in time, when does it emerge? When does it become more prominent? The answer is it doesn't. That gray area there is plus or minus 1 standard deviation from the mean. And what you can see is there's no pattern. The third time through the order penalty effectively has been the same throughout the entire 53-year arc. But maybe that's just a leadoff hitter thing. Here's the second number 2 hitters. And what we're going to see here is exactly the same pattern. A penalty centered around about 110, which is a 10% penalty, and it's consistent throughout all 53 years. Here's number 3 hitters, and I'll show you all the rest. We're going to see the same pattern over and over again. Now, there's a narrative, and I'm sure you've heard it. The third time through the order penalty is kind of a modern construct that analytics and agents and other people have kind of foisted on us. And it's not really a penalty. It's the result of managers and coaches babying their starting pitching, limiting their job to 5 or 6 innings, facing 18 or 19 or 20 batters, and that's it. And then vamoosing, getting out of the game, and handing it over to the bullpen. And under that narrative, starters don't have the endurance anymore to persevere over longer outings the way they did back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. That's why they fall apart during the third time through the order penalty. And what these numbers show, and just to interrupt myself, here's the anomalous result for number 8 hitters last year. What these numbers show is that there's no truth to the narrative. It belies that whole theory. Starting pitchers face the same problems facing the opposing batter or opposing lineup the third time in the 1970s, in the 1980s, in the 1990s, all of them that they do today. It's been a constant. It's not something that's arisen. So the obvious question is, if we had this problem back in the 70s and 80s, same third time through the order penalty, why didn't managers treat it the way they do now? Why didn't they take their pitchers out earlier? I think there are 4 reasons. First one, just a lack of information. You couldn't go on Baseball Reference 1971 and see that this was going on. But even if you could, I think that you'd have a hard time convincing front offices and managers back then that they should change their behavior. It was not exactly the heyday of analytic front offices. Or the way I like to put it is that in 1980, the Oakland A's starting pitchers completed 94 of their starts. You try telling Billy Martin handling is wrong. Now, obviously, another reason is that the best pitchers are still effective the third time through the order. This is one of Tom Seaver's Cy Young Award years. That 622 OPS he allowed the third time was considerably worse than what he did the first couple of times, but that was still really good. So why not leave him in the game? Well, they did in 1975, and I argue the biggest reason they don't now is roster construction. Specifically, we have much larger bullpens now. 8-man bullpens are sort of the norm. And equally or probably more important is the issue of reliever quality. Look, some of us can remember when in the late 60s, early 70s, you might have a 9-man pitching staff, 5 starters, 4 relievers, and of those 4 relievers, 2 of them were old guys trying to hang on, and 2 of them were young guys just getting their feet wet in the majors. Managers then didn't have the option when their pitcher was starting to struggle a little bit the third time through the order of a bullpen like Milwaukee's last year, where you've got an unhittable Josh Hader for the 9th, an unhittable Devin Williams for the 8th. And in the 6th and the 7th, you got this fungible group of relievers who keep shuttling between AAA and the majors all season long with a common denominator that they all throw between 95 and 97 movement. Didn't have the options to at your disposal 50 years ago, 40 years ago that you do today. And to illustrate this, this is a graph of reliever ERA as a percentage of starter ERA over the divisional play era. What you can see is that back in 1969, relievers were actually worse for ERA than were starters. But that, through about the next decade or so, moved down. And what we've seen over this 53 years is, on average, an ERA that's 7% lower for relievers than for starters. And that's occurred even as the workload that's shouldered by relievers has grown over those years. So what you have as a manager, if you're facing a situation where your starter is starting to struggle the third time through the order, you've got some really good arms you can go to, where in the past, they might not have been a superior option to your starter the third time. Now they are. Now, I caution you, don't read anything into the last few years. That dotted line excludes 2020. What's been going on over the last few years to make reliever ERA less impressive relative to starter ERA, it's just a matter of mix. If you divide relievers into high, medium, and leverage pitchers by the leverage that they normally face when they're entering a game, the amount of relief innings pitched by high leverage pitchers has gone down. Medium leverage pitchers, it's been about the same. And lower leverage, the less skilled relievers have doubled their workload. That's largely because in low leverage games where a starter used to stay in the game, you're now bringing in a reliever. So this is just a matter of mix. High, medium, and low leverage relievers are as good now as they were in the past. And wouldn't read anything into the aggregate numbers. It's just a mix. So looking at this, in conclusion, I think there are three conclusions to be drawn from what I've been saying to you. First one, starting pitchers facing the opposing team's lineup third time do worse than it's typically reported. You'll recall the baseball reference number that I calculated for 2021 was about a 7% increase in OPS the third time versus the first couple of times. And all those charts I showed you, the decline was more 11, 12, 13%. It is worse than you. And I think the most interesting conclusion I found in this, and this was something I certainly wasn't expecting to find, is that the third time through the order penalty has existed in its current form for decades. And I'll bet you that if you went back further, you'd find the same thing. An advantage that hitters have always had, the reason why we have increased sensitivity to it now is simply we have the information, we have larger bullpens with really good relievers, where in the past, a starter who wasn't doing as well the third time through the order didn't really have, his manager didn't really have a better choice than to stick with that starter. Now his manager has several superior options. That's why we're seeing pitchers pulled before or during their third time through the order rather than see how they might do. Now with that, we can move on to questions that just have 4 quick acknowledgements. First, this wouldn't be possible without Baseball Reference. It's a great site, and I use it every day pretty much. At Baseball Prospectus, my colleague Sean Brody pulled out all the data for me, which was one line for every plate appearance, for every starting pitcher for 53 years, literally millions of lines of data, certainly above my pay grade. Another one of my Baseball Prospectus colleagues, Derek Rhodes, who does our injury visualizations for us, did all the really cool visualizations in my presentation. And of course, I'd like to thank SABR and SIS for making these research presentations possible. And speaking of SABR, just a reminder that I know that a lot of you are very familiar with analytics, but not all of you are. And for those of you just getting involved with analytics and maybe thinking of it as a way to get more involved in our sport, I strongly recommend SABR Analytics Certification Program, where it's a self-paced course that will teach you a lot of the history and concepts behind analytics. Check it out at sabr.org/analytics/certification. I think it's a great course and you can learn a lot. With that, we can move on to any questions. And I go through these with the possibility of an implemented pitch clock with bases empty in 19-second time. Do you think the stamina of a starting pitcher due to increased tempo of the game will be valued more? There's pretty good research that indicates that the time between pitches is something that has benefited starting pitchers pretty significantly. I think that this will cut against everybody equally. Given that it's not really clear, though, whether the third time through the order penalty is a fatigue or a familiarity issue, I don't know whether it'll change things a lot. Second question, do you think there should be a balance for managers between playing by the analytics and trusting the pitcher? Yeah, absolutely. The issue is, the manager, Kevin Cash had a lot more information about Blake Snell than we did watching him. Snicker had more information about Anderson than we did watching him. Snell has proven himself to not be a great, a guy who can give you a lot of length. Certainly there should be some, some sort of gut feeling there, but I think that managers now are trusting a combination of the data and their guts. Is there a strong difference between AL and NL third time penalty with the DH? Yeah, as I showed, there's a huge difference for number 9 hitters. I don't know that it changes that much through the rest of the lineup. It is well known and accepted there is a decrease in effectiveness third time through the order. With this being the case, do you think there's been such a shift to bullpenning in the playoffs, even though relievers have the same ineffectiveness when facing the same hitters multiple times? That, the question of times faced penalty for relievers is sort of an emerging topic. There's not a lot of data because we don't see situations where relievers face the same batters game after game after game, except in the postseason. I think the answer to that question is probably, maybe, but I don't think we have enough information. Question, would the penalty be as great for pitchers who have a greater arsenal of pitches at their disposal? My answer would be only if we're going to buy the familiarity argument, and only if we're going to say that those familiar, that those pitchers are able to mix up their repertoire a lot, so that a pitcher facing or batter facing that pitcher the third time is facing effectively a new pitcher. That would be pretty tough. Have I done any subsequent research into how pitchers react the third time through the order? Do they change their approach in certain ways? I have not looked into anything like the changes in picks. How is batter familiarity with the run game different over a career and or season? In this scenario, wouldn't the second time through be just as high as the third? Second time, you can see from the numbers, has not been a big penalty for the pitchers. It really seems to be the third time. And as far as whether you get familiarity over a career, we've all seen sort of the crazy numbers that some hitters have against some pitchers, either high or low. I wouldn't read from that, though, that there is a familiarity benefit that goes from year to year. Has the increase in technology in baseball for batters used to learn pitchers made this penalty any worse? Has there been little change? I think my data shows there's been little penalty. Question, after the 2020 series, there were plenty of narratives about Snell specifically having more success the third time through, and that's specifically having less success the third time through. You're making decisions on the field. How would you balance your league-wide findings with players' statistics? You need some really huge data sets to make a player-specific findings like that. And especially, I'll go back to this. Snell over his career has not been a really great pitcher in terms of you length. So I think those criticisms of the move are a little short-sighted. Does this change for the type of pitcher? Does a control finesse guy that might average only 90 to 93 work through the third time around better? A power guy who might sit 95, 97? Okay, for answers, I haven't done the research. Second one, I would guess that the power pitcher might actually do a little better, but I don't know the answer. Is there info on the pitcher's average pitch velocity for the first, second, and third time through the order, and maybe see if it's a fatigue issue? I do not have that, but I encourage you to go to Baseball Prospectus and go through the archive for some of the work that Rob Arthur has done. I have synapse firing my brain said he may have done something like this. How does the third time through the order penalty for the number 9 hitter differ between the AL and NL? During their, well, I think you saw that it was a big penalty for the NL, not so much for the AL. I would expect going forward, we're going to see the number 9 hitter penalty to be similar to what we saw for the other 8 position lineup. It's third time through our penalty further deflated by the selection bias of not letting third time through their penalized loop a third time. That is a great question that I was thinking about. The idea being, is the third time through the order penalty, would it be worse if pitchers who in the past would have stuck in the game aren't being kept in because we know they're not as effective? That's a great question that I do not know the answer to and be really hard to test. I think you may have something to it. And I'll do one more because I want to keep on schedule. It's the third time through the order differentiating greater, less, same between the postseason versus regular season. Somebody give me the postseason data and I will answer that for you. I do not know. I would guess it's probably the same. Okay, we're at time. If anybody has any more questions, you can see my email address, rmains@baseballprospectus.com. If you want to shoot me some more, appreciate the opportunity to speak and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.
Rob, thank you so much. You